Good evening, everyone. My name is Stephanie Sobeck-Swand. I'm the Executive Director of RARE. Thank you for joining us this evening for RARE's Conversation for Conservation, our fourth session of the year. We are so pleased that you can join us here tonight along with our guest speaker, Bob Wildfong, who is here tonight from Seeds of Diversity Canada to discuss seed and food biodiversity. And we will learn how farmers have developed our food crops over thousands of years and how seed savers are helping preserve the crop diversity that keeps food on our tables. But before I introduce Bob in more detail, I would first like to acknowledge the territory we are on. I am speaking from Kitchener tonight, and the RARE Charitable Research Reserve acknowledges and is grateful to all of the original stewards of the land on which RARE resides, within the Haldimand Tract, spanning 6 miles on either side of the Grand River from source to mouth. Understanding that this land has been rich in diverse Indigenous presence since time immemorial, we would like to honor and respect the sovereignty of both First Nations in our area, the Haudenosaunee people of the 6 Nations of the Grand River and the Anishinaabe people of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. Nyahwe and Miigwech to these nations who share their lands with us. We'd also like to acknowledge the neutral peoples and their ancestors and the Indigenous paleo hunters who resided on these lands as long as 10,500 years ago. I would also like to acknowledge those First Nations, Métis, and Inuit who currently live, work, and learn in the urban landscape around us. As an organization that is committed to reconciliation with all Indigenous peoples of Turtle Island, we recognize that our land acknowledgement is only a very small step in the process of healing and building better relationships with one another and with the land and waters. We will continue to honor our commitment to reconciliation by continuing to learn more about truth and settler responsibilities, working towards creation of meaningful and systemic change and relationship building that accommodates Indigenous collaborators at RARE to braid Indigenous knowledges and worldviews. So tonight, I'm very happy to introduce Bob to you. Bob is the Executive Director of Seeds of Diversity Canada, an organization of seed savers who rescue and preserve over 3,000 different varieties of food plants in their gardens. And some of them actually have been grown at RARE as well. So Bob has been saving seeds and teaching about food diversity for over 30 years now. He's also the horticultural teacher and interpreter at the Ken Sealing Waterloo Region Museum, where he grows heritage vegetables, fruit, grains, and herbs in the historical Doon Heritage Village. Always worth a visit, I think. After Bob's talk, we will have time for some questions. And if you have something you'd like to ask or would like to know, please use the Q&A box in the bottom window rather than the chat box, so we can make sure we see your questions and I can share them with Bob, who will be happy to answer, I'm sure. So please join me in welcoming Bob Wildfong tonight. Welcome, Bob.
Thank you very much, Stephanie. It's a real pleasure to speak with this particular group tonight. I have had many years as having Seeds of Diversity and RARE working together, especially at the Springbank farm, which is some place that I know very, very well because for many years we've had our garlic collection there, and for many years we've been doing some of our seed production there. And I'm happy to count myself as a volunteer in the gardens there as well. Tonight I'm talking about Seeds of Diversity's work. It is a seed saving organization based in Waterloo, but we have seed savers all across the country who collect seeds of rare varieties of food crops in their farms and their gardens, and primarily exchange those seeds among each other so that other people can grow them, but also we provide samples of those seeds in Seedy Saturdays, including the one that RARE hosts. We have seed exchanges all across the country, and we also back up the most unusual, most difficult to find kinds of food plant seeds in seed banks, both in this region and also in other places across Canada. So I'm talking about conservation of plants here, but I'm really talking mostly about the conservation of food plants. And that is very closely related in practice to the conservation that we do of wild plants. Of course, plants are all kind of the same anatomically. They all produce seeds, and we can collect those seeds and we can grow the plants in different places, and we can keep the seeds in storage and share them among different people who might use them in different ways. The difference between wild plants that you might be familiar with and food plants that you might be familiar with is not just that we grow food plants to eat the food, but it's also the fact that almost all of our food plants come from someplace else in the world. And although it's really important to grow them locally, they're not from here. And so the way that we grow food plants is often very different than the way we would grow wild plants, just because they wouldn't grow here by themselves because they're not from here. We do have, however, many kinds of food plants that are well adapted to growing in Canada, and that have originated either in farms or in, say, plant breeding projects in Canada, and that makes them Canadian varieties of food. And we conserve those especially because we know that those are the ones that are going to be most adapted to growing here in our growing conditions. So I'd like to talk about this concept of seed security, which is very closely related to the concept of food security. And you've probably heard food security. It's just having a safe and reliable supply of food that people want. It's the kind of food that gives people the right kind of diet or the right kind of cultural cuisine. Well, seed security is having a safe and reliable supply of the seeds that are going to produce those kinds of food. And so having the right kinds of seeds and making sure that we retain the supply and the ability to produce the right kinds of seeds in Canada, that's my job with Seeds of Diversity, to conserve those kinds of food crops. And we'll go through a lot of sort of the reasons why that's a challenge and how come somebody has to do that, why it doesn't just happen on its own. But the basic reasons why we do it are for adaptation. We are experiencing many changes. Obviously, the big one is climate change. That's changing the way that we grow food, the way that we even plant our seeds, and it will affect the way not only that we grow the food, but the kinds of food that we grow. We may find that some of the foods that we're eating 20 years from now are different from the foods that we eat today. And that might be surprising until you realize that if you're as old as I am, you know that we eat different foods today than we did 20 years ago. There are cultural changes that have brought different foods into our local cuisine. There are technological changes that have changed the kinds of food that we eat and the kinds of food that we grow. All throughout history, we can go back about every 20 or 30 years and find some major changes in the way that we produced food, or the way that we cooked food, the way we stored or transported food, and that affected the kinds of food or the kinds of crop varieties of our food that we eat. And so in fact, it's true that about every 20 to 30 years, we wind up using a different portion of the crop gene pool. All those different kinds of crops that are out there in seed banks, we're using a different portion of that every 20 years. And we'll have to do that again 20 years from now and 40 years from now. We will have to use a different kind of crop than we are using today. And so this notion of conservation is really important for responding and adapting to the changes that have happened and will definitely continue to happen. So I'd like you to think about food biodiversity. That's what I mean by this is kind of the concept of biodiversity, but applied to all the different kinds of food crops. We had, we think about 100 years ago, about 35,000 different varieties of food plants. So that's different kinds of wheat, different kinds of apples, different kinds of carrots, all the kinds of food you can think of. 35,000 different kinds existed in Canada about 100 years ago. And what happened is we didn't grow all of those 35,000 kinds of food. We don't have 35,000 of those in farms and gardens today. We only have about a quarter of them left because you might imagine that across this great country, there were farmers growing certain kinds of, say, wheat in the maritime provinces. And they would save some of their wheat harvest and plant it again. And there would be other farmers in Ontario doing the same thing, and other farmers in the prairies doing the same thing. Well, they grew different kinds of wheat. So as they saved their own wheat seeds and replanted their own seeds, they were able to maintain a diversity of wheat just by saving their own seeds. Now, as seeds became a mass market product during the 20th century, people started growing the same kinds from region to region, and that meant fewer kinds were grown, fewer kinds were saved, and we actually have now remaining only about 1/4 as many of the crop varieties that existed 100 years ago. What makes it worse than that is that we're really actually only using about 12%. If we look at all the varieties of food crops that are in cultivation that you can get from seed catalogs, that's only about 12% of what's left. It's that's just 3% of the whole thing. So our job, if we could describe our job in a nutshell as a conservation organization, it is to find the other 88% of what's remaining to us and make sure that it's safe so that we'll be able to use it in the future. Say 20 years from now, when changes, could be climate changes, it could be patterns of pests and diseases, it could be changes in culinary preferences, it could be technologies in storage or transportation or processing or any of those things that have changed our food system in the past. It's definitely going to change it in the future. We'll need that 88% of our crop genes to adapt in the future, because we won't make it if we just keep the 12% we're using now. So I want to kind of give this a little bit of a reality here. Here are 5 pretty common garden varieties of vegetables. You might recognize these. If you open a seed catalog or look in an online seed catalog, you'll see these 5 varieties of vegetables pretty easily, pretty commonly. Well, for every 5 of those, there are this many that are alive and existing someplace, but you can't buy them. They don't exist in any seed catalog. You can find them in a seed bank. You can find them in a seed exchange. Just backyard seed savers will be growing these and offering them to each other, but you won't be able to buy them anyplace. And for this many, there are this many that existed at one time, but they're gone. We can't find them. They're gone forever. And once they're gone forever, we can't make them again. It's not like a wristwatch or, some sort of antique that we could always just make another one. Once one of these is gone, it's gone forever. And the reason is that it takes an enormous amount of effort to make a food plant. Okay, here are some wonderful, wonderful things. These are the most amazing things that people have ever created. Over on the left, here's some lettuce, and over on the right, here's some wheat. And if you never thought before that these are the most amazing things that people ever created, our greatest achievement, because you might think that our greatest achievement might be going to the moon or making smartphones or something like that. But what does it take to make lettuce? And what does it take to make wheat from the wild plants that they originally came from? Because this plant over on the left, that's lettuce. That's exactly the same thing as the plant on the right. It's just that it's gone through a few thousand years of domestication. So, in fact, we know that in Southern Europe, this plant over on the left, lettuce, was being eaten by the Romans. They would cook it. They would have to pick it when it's really young and tender, because it gets bitter once it gets to be of any size. So just the little tiny plants when they're very small. Kind of the same way, if you've ever tasted dandelion greens when they're really small, they're okay to eat then, and you just can't eat them when they're big because they get bitter and tough. Same thing with lettuce. But they found over 2,000 years that every now and then there's a plant that's a little bit more tender, it's a little bit more tasty, grows a little bigger, it doesn't go to seed as readily, and so the smart farmers saved seeds from those better lettuce plants, and over thousands of years gave us the lettuces that we have today. All the different kinds of the reds and the Bostons and the romaines, all the different kinds, they all originate from this wild plant. And it took generations and generations and generations of seed saving to produce this from the wild plant. So whenever we lose a lettuce variety, we're losing thousands of years of effort that we cannot reproduce unless we spend that much more effort to make those lettuces again from the wild plant. It's a tremendous loss every time we lose a domestic plant variety. And this is what wheat used to look like, we think. Wheat has been domesticated for such a long time, over 10,000 years, that we don't even know what the original wheat plant was. This little grass here grows in the Middle East. There's a complicated name. It doesn't even have a common name. That might be the original wheat, but it's not really close enough to wheat biologically to even really be the same thing. So wheat is probably actually a combination of a lot of grasses that crossed together and then was bred just by farmers saving seeds and recognizing that if there were a wheat plant a little taller, a little fuller, a little earlier, that they would put that aside. They take the seeds from that plant and set it aside and plant those seeds instead of eating them. And that's some kind of farmer genius who realized that, because it's the only way that this wild plant over 10,000 years turned into the wheat that we eat every day. I like to think that this is humanity's greatest achievement, because it's something that took literally millions of people 10,000 years to do, and we are the recipients of the gene pool of wheat now. What would it be like if we decided not to retain that diversity, the biodiversity of this wheat, and we let lots of different kinds of wheat die out, so that 20 years from now, we would not be able to adapt to changes by using different kinds of wheat that we're not using right now? That would be the greatest shame of humanity. So our organization stands to save seeds and rescue the rare varieties of seeds and get them back into cultivation and make sure that people can grow them. So where is all this seed diversity? It's actually the heritage varieties that have the greatest diversity. Okay, and we can sort of think about heritage varieties sometimes as being an unusual, the funny looking tomatoes and the unusual looking cabbages that, they grow too large sometimes, or they grow too small sometimes. Well, that's where all the genetic biodiversity is in our food. The reason is that there are still many thousands of heritage varieties around, but there aren't that many commercial varieties. If you think of the commercial varieties as being the normal ones, it's actually the other way around, because think about how many new kinds of cabbage come on the market every year. There are a few. And how many new kinds of wheat or oats come on the market every year? There are a few. But over the course of 50 years, those few only add up so far, and they don't make up that many. The number of new varieties in the last 50 years is only about 20% of all the varieties that we still have left, which of course is only a quarter of what we once had, right? So we're sort of promoting the heritage varieties as the ones that are important to keep, because that's where the genetics are, and that's where the opportunities for the future are. And that's what needs to be conserved. You've probably seen this picture. This is kind of in most people's minds where all of these, rare seeds are being kept. They're being kept in this this wonderful seed vault in the Arctic Circle. It's actually on an island in an archipelago that's owned by Norway. So it's basically in a mine shaft in a mountain on a frozen island. And they repurposed the mine shaft to become a seed bank, because seeds hibernate when they're cold. If you keep a seed cold and dry, then a seed can last for a long time, maybe 20 years, maybe 50 years, depending on the kind of seed and depending on how cold it is. But in an old mine shaft in a frozen island in the Arctic Circle, first of all, it's a very safe place. There aren't a lot of people there. There are no wars there. There are, maybe a few people, but more polar bears than people. It's quite politically stable. It's geologically stable. It's a great place to put a seed bank, and that's what they did. This is actually a backup of all the other seed banks in the world, because every country has its own seed banks, including Canada, And what we do here is we back up our seeds in this global seed vault. So to many people, this is the only one that exists, but it's actually one of hundreds of seed banks all around the world. It's kind of like the main backup of those. In Canada, we have our main seed bank at the University of Saskatchewan. It's on the campus at that university in Saskatoon. And I've been there a few times. There's a large Agriculture Canada building on campus, and it looks like sort of a research building, sort of like an office building. But the basement is a gigantic freezer vault where they have 100,000 samples of seeds that are collected from all over the world. And these are samples of mostly things like wheat and oats and barley, but they also have every kind of agricultural or horticultural plant that you can think of among those 100,000 samples of seeds. And this is what they actually look like. And if you think that looks like maybe a shelf full of car parts boxes, it is. It turned out that the envelopes fit perfectly in Delco car parts boxes, and somebody bought a whole bunch of them, and that's what the place looks like. Now, can you get seeds from this? No, unfortunately, you and I won't be able to get seeds because look at how big the envelopes are. They only have maybe 100 grams of each kind of seed, and that's not enough to send out to lots of people. It's not a seed company; it's a seed bank, and it means that they simply don't have the quantities in order to spread the seeds around. So that is literally where we come in. As seed savers, we're able to grow all of these different kinds of unusual seeds that you can't get from seed companies. They're just not marketed in catalogs. But seed savers will grow high quality seeds and exchange them with each other through seed exchanges and through Seedy Saturday seed swaps, and in these sort of very simple, economical, community-focused ways of getting seeds from one person to another. And our goal is to make sure that as many of those hard to find varieties as possible are in those seed exchanges, so then there's greater diversity available to people. We're encouraging farmers to be able to access these kinds of informal sources of seeds. And by that, we're able to keep at least several thousand now varieties of seeds available and alive and in sort of cultivation instead of just being locked away in a seed bank. It's really important that we make this kind of bridge between the seed bank and the people, because we want all the seeds to be grown. We want people to have these seeds, not just have them locked up in a freezer somewhere on a northern island. Seeds are meant to be with people, and that's what we do. It's also important that when we collect seeds that are, say, it's a family heirloom variety, or it's a variety that's been just grown by seed savers for many years, but is not backed up in those seed banks, it's important for us to be able to deliver those seeds into the seed banking system to keep them safe for the future too. Because here's my friend who has this wonderful orange tomato that was her grandma's tomato. She was able to donate some of her seeds into the seed bank system. So now perhaps some of those seeds are now in the Svalbard Global Seed Vault in Norway. We can't really know that for sure, but it is quite possible that it happened. And now she doesn't have to worry about her grandmother's heirloom tomato being saved year after year after year if she should lose it for some reason, or if anyone can have a crop failure in their garden and lose their favorite variety. Well, it'll be backed up in a seed bank, and she might not be able to get it, but Seeds of Diversity has this kind of bridge between the seed bank and the people, so we could help to get it for her, and then she could keep saving seeds and always have it again. That's kind of like our goal. The most important thing is that we also provide those seeds to other people. So we're getting the seeds out of the seed banks and letting people grow them, which is what they're for, at the same time that we're using the seed banks to back up what we grow. If you look on our website, it's really easy. It's just seeds.ca. We have some promotional information there about kind of how we go about all of this. In a nutshell, we like to think of our seed collection as being more of a library than a bank. And my original reason for thinking of this word is that a bank is a place where you put things to keep them safe. And that's important. But a library is a place where you go to get things. And libraries are all about access, and they're all about sharing, and they're all about providing things to communities. And we didn't want to just have a seed bank, yet another cold place where we keep seeds and you can't get them. We wanted to have a place where the seeds would be available and where we would be distributing them as a default. That our first goal is to distribute seeds to communities while we are backing them up. And so that's one of the reasons why we share seeds with the seed banks, so that we don't duplicate that role. We focus our effort on the distribution and the access part. Our member seed exchange is our primary program in this year. We have just about 2,400 different kinds of seeds being exchanged just from member to member. Our membership in our organization is free, and we have about 1,000 members. Right now, 87 of those are growing seeds. The other 900 or so are learning. So this is not an exclusive organization of people who are only dedicated seed savers. We're mostly people who are learning about seed saving, and mostly people who are gardeners, mainly, trying to find ways of using the gardens and our time to do something worthwhile and meaningful. So all members are welcome to get seeds through our seed exchange. And once they have practiced and learned some skills at saving good quality seeds, then they're encouraged to offer the seeds back to other members. And if you can imagine looking through a seed catalog with 2,400 different kinds of seeds in it, and being able to get those seeds from members who are all across the country, from BC to Newfoundland, that's kind of what our seed exchange looks like. If you're more interested in finding a seed company that has a particular kind of seed you're looking for, then we have on our website an index of all the different seed catalogs that are published in Canada. There are now 93 that we know of, Canadian seed catalogs. And if you go to our website right now, you will see a list of all of those companies. You'll also see a list of all the different kinds of seeds that they offer. So if you're looking for a particular variety and it's sold in Canada, then we can tell you where you can buy it. Now you might think, sure, but you could just use Google for that. And it's true. If you Google the name of your favorite variety, you'll also find the seed company that sells it. The real reason why we do this is so that we know which varieties are rare and which varieties are not. Because it's not worth us spending our time and our donors' money and our volunteers' time rescuing varieties that are already sold by a bunch of companies. We want to spend our effort on the varieties that are not being grown by anybody, that might be available from maybe one seed company, but only one. Because if that company stops offering it, then suddenly it becomes one of the 88% that you can't buy, and we'd better have a safety net to be able to catch it. So our seed catalog index is updated every year by volunteers, and the reason for it is so that we know how to prioritize our time, creating the safety net in the right place. But the side effect is you get an index of all the seed catalogs. So if that's useful to you, it's there for free. And so I would like to spend the rest of this time talking about how we go about our conservation and how we use conservation and the diversity that we conserve in order to find more opportunities for long-term seed security. There are kind of three strategies that people use. We have many local varieties. I mentioned that there are lots of food plant varieties that have been developed in Canada or that have adapted to being grown in Canada. And sometimes those are the best varieties for us because they're adapted to where we are. If you can find the crop varieties or the garden varieties that are from your place, then those should be the ones that grow best, or at least they'll grow better than the ones that grow much further south, or the ones that grow much further, maybe on the east or west coast. Another strategy that we use is trying to test all these thousands of different kinds of food plants that we still have left, and see which of them grow best. Because what grows best here would probably be different than what grows best in another part of the country. Canada is very big, has lots of different climate areas, temperature and humidity and rainfall patterns, and the frost dates are different all across Canada. And I get to talk to gardeners in every province, and it's interesting to find out how things are different, and not only different because they're in different places, but different from year to year as well. The growing conditions that we experience here throughout a typical summer will be very different from the growing conditions that someone else in another province experiences. And you know this because we've heard about droughts and we've heard about floods at times when we've had the opposite thing here. That seems to happen a lot. And so it may not make sense always to look for the best. So I will want to propose too that maybe mixing and finding resilience is another way to achieve a better result. When you see these pictures here, if you have a drought one year and you have a flood the next year, how do you decide which plants you should plant? Do you plant a drought-resistant plant, or do you plant a flood-resistant plant when you don't know what's going to happen? And that's our dilemma. It always has been our dilemma, but it's becoming much more severe as the climate changes. So first of all, local varieties. I can list about 150 different varieties of tomatoes that were bred in Canada. And some of them have French names, like this one, Early Rouge. It was bred in Quebec. Some of them have names that are related to particular places. There's one called Early Lethbridge, so you know it grows in Alberta. There's one called Summerland, so you know that it grows in BC. There's one called Sweet Manitoba, so you know where it comes from. And then there are 147 other ones. But have you seen those varieties in your local seed store, or when you buy seeds, or if you're looking in seed catalogs, have you seen those kinds of names? And chances are you have seen a few of them, but not most. The reason that they're hard to find is that most of our seeds come from other parts of the world. We purchase seeds that are grown internationally, just like we purchase food that's grown all around the world. If you buy a package of seeds in Kitchener, chances are those seeds did not come from a farm near Kitchener. Chances are they came from a seed farm in the US or Mexico, or maybe in Asia. A lot of our vegetable seeds are produced in the Middle East and shipped here. So how do you know that the seeds you buy in a seed packet are really well adapted to growing in this area? The only way you can really know that is if you purchase your seeds from a local seed company that has grown its own seeds, and go back to the seed finder on our website, look for a seed company that is located near where you live, and check if they produce their own seeds, and that's how you know. That's how you get local seeds. The other way you know is that you can grow varieties that were bred locally. But why would a seed company that produces seeds in some large scale in Mexico or Asia produce Canadian tomatoes? Because Canada is a really small market in the gardening world compared to the US, compared to Europe or Asia. We're a tiny market. So in fact, international seed, the global seed trade does not provide Canadian varieties, even though they exist. So as seed savers, we can produce our own seeds. As people who promote local seed sales, local seed companies, local seed exchanges, we can encourage people to find those local varieties and grow them again and have more of those seeds available. And that's one of the strategies we use. Here are some of the names of some of the seed or some of the tomatoes that were bred in Canada, and you can tell that these are mostly from, they may all be from Alberta. In fact, somehow they're all from the prairies. But they have dates that all range from about the mid 1950s until the 1970s. And that is for a reason. Shortly after the Second World War, it became evident that we could not depend on being able to access seeds from around the world. At that time, during World War II, we had already become dependent on seeds grown in other countries and other continents. During the war, we couldn't always get seeds. So the Canadian government put a lot of investment into public plant breeding of Canadian varieties of vegetables, of grains, of fruit. There are all sorts of new varieties developed during that period to create self-sufficiency. And I think we're seeing some examples in recent years and today of why self-sufficiency might not be such a bad idea. Well, these varieties are still there in seed banks, even if they're not in seed catalogs, and we can still make use of that investment that went in back then and grow local varieties to get local food. It just makes sense. Another strategy we use, we have this diversity, this genetic biodiversity of food plants that we're conserving. Why are we conserving it? Except to use it. And the way we will know how to use it is by trying different varieties in different places. If we have only a quarter of the seed diversity remaining that we had 100 years ago, well, that's still a lot. It's still thousands of varieties, and they haven't been grown everywhere because Canada has a very different assortment of climate areas and soil types, and so trying different varieties in different places is still something that hasn't been done. And moreover, what's even more important is that not very much testing and trialing has been done on those varieties from the 1970s and 1960s under organic conditions. When those mid 20th century new varieties came out, they were all grown with lots of pesticides and lots of herbicides and lots of insecticides, because that's the way things were done then, right? During my lifetime, I've seen a great shift in wanting our food in particular to be grown organically. And so now seed companies are developing varieties that are produced organically and tested organically to make sure that they will grow well under organic cultivation. They're not dependent on insecticides and so on. It may be that some of the heritage varieties that we've kind of set aside are actually better under organic conditions than some of those that were developed in the 1970s. Because in the 70s, they were not developed for organic growing, they were developed for chemical growing. And the older heritage varieties were developed at an earlier time when we didn't have those chemicals. So it's almost as if we've come full circle, and dipping back into the gene pool and trying those heritage varieties under organic growing sometimes is really successful. But there's so much experimentation to do. There are so many varieties still, so many places, different regions, different soils, and now trying them with a different kind of fertilizer regime in organic conditions. We can still do a lot of testing and a lot of discovery in this gene pool that we're conserving. And after all, that is the reason why we're conserving it, so that we can use it. But trying to find the best variety is sort of the first thing we think of. It makes sense. Let's try all those different kinds of wheat or carrots. Just try them all and see which one's best. That just sort of makes sense at first blush, but it turns out to not make sense because the weather is different every year. And as the weather becomes even more different every year because of climate change, that strategy of trying to find the best makes less and less sense. And we need to have actually a different way of thinking about this, not looking for which is the best variety, which is the best wheat, which is the best garlic, which is the best tomato, but finding what is the best combination of those things that will provide resilience no matter what the weather gives us. That's the new way of thinking. I'll give you an example, and this is really close to home because Seeds of Diversity's garlic collection is actually kept at Rare. It's kept at the Springbank farm. We at the community garden along Blair Road. We have 70 varieties. It's actually grown by 6 since I made this slide. We have 76 varieties of garlic that come from all over the world. They have names like Guatemalan Aikita is one of them. There are names like Greek Acropolis. So you know that they come from certain parts of the world. I grow 76 different kinds of garlic right there all together and measure them. See the measuring stick over there, the ruler? I measure them, I weigh them. We measure how tall they grow. Every time we do a garlic harvest, it takes a number of people, and we have to separate the different kinds of garlic into about 200 different little paper bags so that they can be tested in different ways and weighed and measured and so on, all labeled, and it's a complicated thing. You would think that having done this for many years now, I would be able to tell you which is the best garlic, because surely one of them grows better than the others consistently. And it doesn't. One year there will be one garlic that outperforms all the others, and I think, great, what a great garlic. And the next year it's terrible compared to the others right next to it, because the weather is different. And garlic is very sensitive to the weather in the spring, for the temperature and the moisture level in the spring. Now we plant garlic in the fall and harvest it in the summer. It's kind of like you plant daffodils and tulip bulbs in the fall, right? It's the same with garlic. So you can't predict what the spring will look like. You can't predict whether it'll be warm or dry or cold or anything like that. But the garlic responds differently, and different varieties respond differently. So my best variety in 2015 is terrible in 2019, but is another best variety in 2016 that's terrible in 2017, and there is no best variety at all. But we've discovered something. We have discovered that these two varieties have those kinds of variation in yield opposite to each other. So on the left, there's a variety called Music, which you have undoubtedly eaten and seen if you didn't know the name. It's the most common garlic variety grown in Ontario. You might recognize it because it almost always has 4 cloves, 4 great big cloves. So it's nice and easy to peel. You get a great big clove out of it for the amount of peeling that you have to do. It's pretty reliable. It handles our winters really well. It's a good reliable variety. So lots of garlic farmers grow Music. And if you get Ontario grown garlic at a market, you will almost for sure see that one. But this other one over on the right, called Baba Franchuk's garlic, is just one of those 76 other kinds of garlic that's in our collection. We've noticed that if Music has a really good year, then Baba Franchuk probably won't. But if Baba Franchuk has a really good year, then Music probably won't. And so as a garlic grower, this is really important to know. If you were lucky and you just planted one of these, then you'd have the right kind of weather and you'd have a wonderful garlic harvest and you'd make lots of money selling your garlic. But if you were not lucky and you grew one of these kinds and you had a bad year, then your crop yield would be very low, the garlic would be small, people wouldn't want to buy it, and it would be a real waste. It would be an impact on your income as a garlic grower to have a bad year. But what if you grew half Music and half Baba Franchuk? Then every year you'd have a decent harvest. Every year you would have a stable income. And if you asked a whole bunch of farmers, would they rather have a stable income year after year, or would they rather have a roller coaster ride of a bumper crop one year and a disaster the next year and not know which one was going to happen? Most of those farmers would choose the stable income. And I think most people would, in any case, no matter what their job was. This is how we can do it. It's about not finding the best. It's about finding the right mix that gives us resilience. And that is one of the strategies that I think will be what gets us through a lot of the changes and a lot of the challenges of the next century. Not thinking about which variety of wheat or apple or anything will give us the best harvest or make the most money in the right condition. It's what will give us a stable yield and a stable food supply, no matter what. Not just in a good year, but no matter what happens. It's the mix. That's what we're going to see a lot more, and that's what we're going to use our diversity for. It's the reason why we're doing all the conservation, so that we have lots of choices and lots of means for experimenting and finding the right mixes that will give us resilience. So to sum up, the reason that we're doing this conservation project on our food crops is that we know that we use biodiversity. We always have used biodiversity to adapt to changes. And the reason that we have a food system today is that we have used biodiversity about every 20 years in the past to adapt to all the changes that have happened. Because we certainly don't eat or grow our food today the same way that we did 20 years ago, 100 years ago. We've adapted to changes already. And so we have the same tools available for future adaptation, as long as we conserve that biodiversity and keep it alive and available to people. And what's important, I think, for our organization as a seed savers organization is that we can engage anybody who can grow a few plants in their garden to save some seeds and to try out some different kinds of food varieties that other people haven't tried out, and learn something, and by saving some seeds, be able to pass those on to some other people through something as simple as a seed exchange. And anybody and everybody can participate in preserving our food system that way. So I'll have to take some questions. I want to make sure that you're able to find online tools that I mentioned. Our seed finder is on our website at seeds.ca. That's the list of all the seed, or the index rather, of all the seed catalogs, which many people use to find sources for their favorite varieties, but we internally use to figure out what our priorities should be in building our safety net. And our seed exchange, which is how we actually provide seeds to one another and enable seed savers to make some meaningful use of their time and their skills. And I would be happy for any questions that come up.
Well, thank you so much, Bob. That was really interesting. I think we have a small handful of questions here already. So let me start here. Selma Webster is asking, I like to grow the Howard paste tomato from the seed bank at the library. Do you know where it was developed?
The Howard paste tomato, as far as I know, is a Pennsylvania German heirloom tomato. It's a nice, narrow, long, pointed paste tomato, very dry inside, so it makes a really good paste because it doesn't have a lot of juice. I think it's from the Pennsylvania Amish originally, but where they got it, I don't know, because tomatoes don't originate from Pennsylvania, so they got it from somebody else, and this is part of the chain of seed savers.
Yeah, there's
back about a couple hundred years, but that's about it.
There's so many cool varieties of tomato in particular. I used to work at the Botanical Museum in Berlin, and they had a lot of different kind of heirloom tomatoes there too. And there's this one that's called the German treble tomato or something, where you can break off kind of little pieces, but the rest of the tomato remains intact. I thought it was the coolest thing ever.
I think I've seen pictures of that. It's like,
yeah,
it comes apart like a bunch of grapes or something.
It does. It's so strange. Anyways, so another question we have here. let me see, from Deborah is, when collecting seeds, how do you know when the seeds are ready?
For most plants, like 90%, produce seeds that are brown and dry when they're ready on the plant. So if you think of a flower, it starts off with some petals, and then it turns into sort of a green ball, but the seeds in there won't be ripe yet. And eventually it turns brown and dry, and that's when the seeds inside will be ripe. So the same is true with almost all of our flowers. Any herbs are like that too. If the stem is still green, then the seeds in the flowers are not ripe yet. You wait until they turn brown, and keep an eye on it, because the seeds will fall off if you wait too long. So you have to wait till they turn brown and then get them right away. With things that come in pods like beans or peas, you wait again until they turn brown and dry. This is true for 95% of all plants. For the other 5%, those are seeds that come in a fruit, like tomatoes, peppers, watermelon. If you have watermelons with seeds in them, which I still grow those. In those cases, you wait until the fruit is fully ripe. So as soon as the tomato is good and ripe and ready to eat, that's when the seeds are ready. And if the watermelon is good to eat, then that's when the seeds are ready.
Yeah, my experience has been, when I'm trying to harvest seeds in my garden, is that there's never anything left when I try to do that, because the critters will eat them all already before they even turn brown. Particularly with the sunflower seeds, I have not had good luck in recent years. The birds and squirrels just come and get right in there, take them all.
The birds know exactly when the sunflower seeds are ready.
Yeah.
So if you see the birds going after them, then that's when they're ready.
There's another question about, and you spoke a little bit about this, I think, when you were talking about the mix for resilience, but are there different sort of local seed banks around the country that are very specialized for those specific local climates?
It is happening that way, yes. There are several small groups that are forming seed libraries in their own regions, and we find that in Ontario we're in a more of a homogeneous kind of area. We don't experience climate change here yet the way that they do on the coasts, for example. So a lot more of that awareness is happening in BC. There have been just last summer, horrifying droughts and floods. The news of what was going on in BC last summer was evidence of what's to come, I think. But you can imagine what community groups are doing with respect to collecting seeds in BC, because they can see the need for that right now. Same is true on the East Coast. There are a lot of weather events on the East Coast that are much more serious, and that's I think waking people up. And there are local seed banks being started up there, just as groups of gardeners would organize any kind of community garden. Imagine that process being applied to making a community seed library. It's very much the same kind of motivation, and the same kind of thinking, and the same kind of feeling to it too.
Yeah, this is really interesting, Bob. And that slide that you showed with all the different varieties and all the ones that have already disappeared, it really made my jaw drop, because I didn't realize that there were so many of them that might not be coming back, because we currently don't have them anymore. Do you think there's still an odd chance for some of these, that some old 94-year-old lady is growing them somewhere in their backyard, and she's just not on the internet and doesn't know she's the last one?
That's exactly right. Yes, that happens. It doesn't happen very often, but for sure it happens. And I've had the experience of an old order woman, an old order Mennonite woman, who gave me a handful of bean seeds, and she said that her grandmother had grown these and had brought them from Pennsylvania when they moved here in around 1910. And they had simply grown these beans in their family as old order Mennonite gardeners. Saving seeds is very normal. And now I grow those pole beans every year, and I have tried to compare them with every other kind of pole bean that I can find and have not yet found a match. So that's just my one example. That sort of thing happens, I think, very often, not as often as I wish it did. But the important thing to realize is that if there is an heirloom bean or tomato or anything that may not be grown by anybody else, it should find its way into the hands of somebody who can save the seeds, and it should find its way into some kind of a seed collection so that it can be kept and maintained, so that it doesn't just disappear forever. There are so many, that slide with just the few names and the more the names and all the ones that have disappeared. So many of the yellow ones are just on the edge, and they're going to turn red if no one looks after them.
Yeah.
And that's the example of the 94-year-old woman who's been saving this, prized family heirloom bean. That's one of the yellow ones that we need to rescue.
Yeah, and the same is probably also true, I would assume, for some of the indigenous seed varieties that have been kept by indigenous seed knowledge keepers. Are they also involved in the work at Seeds of Diversity, or how do you collaborate?
I believe that today, indigenous seed keepers are the people who should be doing that work. I think it's really important, and that has changed over the last few years. There's been, as you know, a real change in the way that indigenous culture is prized, but meant to be perpetuated by indigenous people. And so 10 years ago, I think a lot of seed-saving organizations like Seeds of Diversity would have said that we should be collecting indigenous seeds and we should be preserving them. But today, it's really obvious to me that indigenous groups and indigenous seed keepers should be the ones doing that, and doing it on the terms that they view as being legitimate. So our role as a settler-based seed-saving organization is to support that, and to provide whatever tools are useful, but not certainly to do that work directly, and not certainly to guide that work.
Yeah, no, that's wonderful, Bob. Speaking of all these kind of different types of seeds, how does your work of preserving these edible vegetables and fruits, how does it fit into the work of other organizations that, for example, focus on wildflower and tree seed diversity? Is there overlap, or is this all completely separate?
There's some overlap. I'm a big fan of lots of botanical organizations that preserve wild plants or especially tree seeds. But I think actually at the very beginning I said that there is a difference between native plants and our food plants, most of them anyway, because most of our food plants are not from here, and they grow differently, and they require a lot more care because they're not from here. You can't just put them in the ground and expect them to take care of themselves, which is the great attraction to native plants that have been looking after themselves here. You put them in the right place and they should be able to go. Our seed banks often look different too, because many of our food plants are tropical plants that don't require any kind of stratification. So stratification means a chilling period, usually, that breaks a dormancy in native plants. Because, say, any plant that originated in Ontario kind of has to know when winter is done. And the way it does that is it has a built-in dormancy, which is broken by being frozen and thawed often. A tomato seed has no such dormancy. Tomatoes are from a tropical place in Central America. They have no dormancy at all. So we are able to just put tomato seeds in an envelope in your house at room temperature and then plant them without any kind of stratification step. It means that the garden seed for food, garden seeds for food are treated very differently than native plant seeds because they don't require that dormancy breaking. So for all of these reasons, we just do things differently with native plant seeds and most of our food seeds. And so it makes sense for those collections to be managed separately because the practices are different. However, as a seed saver, I love all kinds of plants. So I work with native plants and I work with trees and I work with tomatoes too. But you learn to do those kind of methods differently. And so it makes sense that there are different agencies that are working with different groups of people and working in different situations, and because the plants really are different from each other.
Yeah. Well, Jill is asking, how do you identify unknown seed varieties? Or do you get any DNA testing done even?
We're not quite up to that. That's becoming much more affordable, and so there are actually some projects being done here and there to find out if a certain kind of plant is the same as another one. We'll often have like the garlic collection is a great example. Actually, I said there are 76 kinds of garlic there. Probably at least a few of them are actually the same, but with different names. And I can look at them and say, those are the same. And other people can look at them and say, yeah, those are the same. But are they? And if that were confirmed by a DNA test, then it's a very simple case of somebody got some garlic from a friend, didn't know the name, so they gave it another name, and it grew under a separate name. I think that happens fairly often. And if we knew that two varieties were actually the same and exactly the same, then we wouldn't have to maintain two of them. It would save us half as much work, right? So there's an attraction to being able to narrow that down. But I don't have the facilities for doing that directly. It's more something that we can do in partnership with, say, a university project. So gradually that is being done, though. And some people have been doing that with garlic, as a matter of fact.
Yeah, that's interesting. It makes a lot of sense, particularly what you say, to make sure there's no duplicates. I have one last question here from Mary Catherine, who is asking, how hard is it to save cucumber seeds?
It's easy, but there's a trick to it. So I answered an earlier question by saying when the fruit is ready to eat, that's when the seeds are ready. And I knew when I said that it wasn't really true, because cucumbers and a couple others like green peppers are actually eaten when they're underripe. So obviously when you eat a cucumber, it is not full of seeds. All those little bits in the very center that kind of look like seeds, they're not formed yet. And that's because we eat cucumbers when they're not even close to being ripe. If you let a cucumber ripen all the way, that means first it gets long and then it turns green. It looks like it's ready to eat, but then you let it grow longer and longer. It turns soft. It often turns yellow, and the seeds inside get hard, a lot like inside a cantaloupe. When I look at fully ripe cucumber seeds and cantaloupe seeds, I can't tell the difference. Okay, they're that hard and plump, and you don't want to bite into the cucumber at that point because it will be spongy and probably bitter and tough and really seedy, but the seeds will grow. So the trick is you let some of your cucumbers ripen all the way until the cucumber gets spongy, and that's when you'll find the ripe seeds inside.
Oh yeah, that is interesting, but it does not sound pleasant to take a bite out of it at that point. So the seeds are, anyways, I think this was the extent of questions that we have. So thank you everyone for joining us tonight. And thank you so much, Bob, for this great presentation. That was really interesting. And if you all in the attendance, if you enjoyed this event and would like to see more events like this, please visit our website, raresites.org, and consider making a small donation. And all donations over $20 will receive an automatically generated text receipt that will be sent straight to your inbox. And thank you also, Chris and James, for organizing this event tonight here. And we really hope that we do see everyone again at our next Conversation for Conservation, which is scheduled to take place on Wednesday, May 25th at 7 p.m. And believe it or not, we're planning to do it in person at the Rare Slit Barn. So please join us with Nicola Ross as she tells her story of launching her Loops and Lattes hiking guides and describing her adventure in words and photographs. And Nicola will bring alive the rich beauty of the hiking trails available in our backyards here in Waterloo Region, Wellington, and that have become her career and vocation. And registration will be required for that event, so stay tuned for more information. And thank you and have a wonderful night.